Welcome to I Heart Geek.
And welcome to another episode of I Heart Geek. Yay! This is my co-host Satomii down there.
This is my co-host Dub up there doing the Brady Bunch right
Close
now
enough,
on the Zoom. Yeah, heck yeah. And we have our guest back. So excited.
And I got to say this before we introduce. This guy has had more feedback from people, just from our audience, just loved what he did last time. So we had to bring him back because this guy, boo! This is your brain. Boo! That's what's going to happen. So, Satomii, introduce our guest.
Well, I can't go through the entire litany of everything that he does because it's a lot and he's really cool. But we are so excited to have Professor Josh Stout back with us on I Heart Geek. Thank you so much, Josh, for coming back.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm really excited to be here, and it's wonderful that I get to talk about almost anything on your show. So this is perfect. You asked me about free will, and that's a big topic. I can't believe we were going there, but sure, why not? This is the big question. Really.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's hit into this. This is what we're talking about today. By the way, I was reading Sandman, so therefore, you read Neil Gaiman and you start thinking, what are the deeper things in life? So I wanted to discuss, especially, we're going to try to keep it in a pop culture realm, but free will versus predestiny.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting stuff. I mean, we're going to talk Doctor Who because that has my favorite idea, predestiny versus free will.
Yeah, but when you think about the storytelling that's been done for all time, and then of course the huge franchises that are popular today have massive themes of the one, the chosen one.
Yeah, well, these are the two big questions. Okay, there's another one about the one. So the two questions in philosophy are the one and the many, and free will versus predestination. We're going to stick with the free will stuff. We're not going to decide if there's one thing or if there's lots of things. That's a different question for a different day.
Okay, but cool. I look forward to that episode.
Yeah, it's like in biology, we ask, what is life? We don't really figure it out, but we kind of get there. In math, they asked, is there any way to come up with a foundation for all knowledge? And the answer is no. They actually answered that one. But this one's not, there's no really good answer to this one because you have to go sort of both ways. And it really does start with, so first of all, little disclaimer, I'm talking Western stuff here. I don't know Chinese, India, Africa. Like there's a whole nother world out there of things. And when I say West, I don't mean Native American. I'm meaning my culture that I know a lot about. So we're talking from that point of view, which is, a culture that most of us are living in, but not necessarily all of us. And I have to be careful about us, particularly because of white males. When they say us, they mean me.
Yes,
so I have to be careful about who that means.
I would love to put this out to our geek audience, is that if you know anybody who is very, very well versed, who is educated, who teaches philosophy in other traditions, traditions, I mean, please reach out to us. We'd love to have those folks on to talk about a little bit. I mean, I actually grew up Buddhist, going to a Catholic school, so I am just a big mishmash. Yes, I'm a big mishmash. So I might chime in here and there, but I do want to hear you were. So you were saying the one and the many in terms of like. The one, is that what you mean? Like
sorry. Now you've got a different question, but is the universe one thing or is it made up of lots of things? And so this was Zeno's paradox, for example. Can you go halfway and then halfway and then halfway, and do you ever get? And the answer is, well, we seem to. But the people who say there's many, so that's the answer to the problem of the many. People who say there's only one means that there's no here or there, so you never get anywhere. So either one or the many, we can't move and we can't do anything. So
so that's what you mean by those two different things.
Yeah. You split everything up into infinitesimal parts, or you just see it's all one thing. There's different ways to see it. It's the same with predestination. They're not disconnected things. You don't have one choice versus another, but you have different ways of seeing how we're fitting into this is what we have to end up doing. So the Greeks thought about it as fate, and the fates were weaving the fates, and you had a thread, and you could be snipped, and they could see the future, but they could also change things. You could unweave things and reweave them, and you would be given choices. So Achilles was given the choice of eternal immortal fame, but early death, or long, happy life, no one knows who you are. And so he had two possible fates, and he was given a choice. And so most people aren't given choices like this. Their fates are just sort of these drab, humdrum lives we live. But every once in a while, someone can transcend that. But no matter what you do, I think according to the Greek ideas, it was still fate. But their version, you had a lot of wiggle room. You could do a lot of things, but no matter what happened, at the end, you were ending up at your fate.
So now with the Greeks, though, because you said he had a choice and a lot of people don't.
Right.
Was there an idea of exceptionalism in order to, like, the fact that he, was...
There were gold threads in the weaving. There were people who were gold threads, and then there were people who were brown threads and gray threads and boring threads.
Okay.
And so,
and
yes, certain people who sort of drive the plots of the legends are the gold threads. And this is something that will wind up when we get to Doctor Who and time travel, the idea of there's certain fixed points, and then there's the idea of things that can move around within it before you get to that fixed point.
And is that a very Greek concept? I mean, is that kind of...
It seems to be how the Greeks thought about it. They didn't write about it that way, but it seems to be sort of how they thought. They didn't really think outside that. They were like, there's things that have to happen, but of course we have free will in our day-to-day lives. You choose what you want for breakfast. That seems to be free will. So they didn't actually discuss this much. It was really the medieval philosophers working within the Christian tradition who became difficult for. Because if God is omnipotent, then he knows what you're going to do ahead of time, no matter what you decide you're going to do.
That's the common one I hear the most.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's difficult to escape that logic. And that's the logic behind predestination in most of Christianity, Islam, many of the major religions. That's sort of the way things are working. But then how do you arrive at this idea of seems like we have free will? And mostly the answer,
and like sinning versus like choosing to sin versus
Yeah, that's what St. Augustine was working with. There was an early heresy in the church that said, if you're good, you go to heaven, which seems to be like what we often hear these days. But St. Augustine was like, no, only God tells you if you can go to heaven, and your goodness
doesn't affect it.
Well, is kind of given to you by God. If you are lucky enough to do the right things to go to heaven, it's because God wanted you to do that in the first place. So it gets difficult. And then how does free will come into that?
But then doesn't that contradict like the story of Job, where God has a bet with the devil about how good Job is, and then he's going to turn away from God. How can God have a bet with the devil if he already knows that Job is going to hang tight?
What's the point of original sin? If God put that thing there that he knew Adam and Eve would eat, what was the point of all that? And so this is a lot of sort of the broken circle.
Okay. I do want to point out we're tearing this apart, like looking at this.
We're more in the abstract than the
we're not talking about opinions or anything. We're just looking at it from the outside. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So I had a kung fu teacher who said his favorite letter was the letter Q because it was a circle with a line through it. And that broken circle. So if this is nature and this is before we eat the fruit, we're just in this sort of circle where nothing ever happens. But once you've disobeyed and you've broken that circle, you can come back again, but you've left nature behind. And so the original sin in some theology is called the happy sin, Felix Culpa. It's the idea of the thing that made it so that we could have free will.
Yeah.
And so that's where that separation comes in.
I also you're reminding me, one of the concepts that always fascinated me, because I studied Sufism for several years, and there at least in the school that I was studying in, there was the concept that Lucifer was not a cast out angel, but instead was actually God's favorite, like stayed God's favorite, and as an honor and a sacrifice went away from God in order to be the foil for humanity, to help them get better and to take them away so that they could return, which is kind of there's like little pieces of that I'm hearing in here. as well. But
Yeah.
but there's still
breaking that circle
choice.
so you
Yeah,
can
but
come
there's
back,
yeah,
but at a higher
exactly.
level, so it becomes a spiral.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because it's the return. It's the
Yeah,
you know, it's
yeah,
all
yeah.
about returning to it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so things were pretty fixed in the medieval period. Everything was decided pretty much on the side of predestination. Free will didn't matter. Renaissance started to break out of that humans actually have agency. We can invent new things. We can come up with new ideas.
Where do you think that came from?
What's that?
I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
It's no
but
problem.
where do you think that came from?
It was going back. It was the people who really it was the fall of Constantinople. When the fall of Constantinople happened, all of this Greek thought came back to Western Europe via Venice and a couple of the Italian city-states. And so people were starting to look back at classical traditions that was a little less fixed and getting back more to things like fate and stuff like that, but also the idea that people could invent things and you could look at nature and invent a crane that would build a building for you.
Now, can you go just a little bit in, because I want to make sure that I'm following this storyline in a way in my brain. You say it's because of the fall of Constantinople. What was it about are we talking about immigrants coming in? Are we talking about
they were refugees, but it was the medieval world only had Latin translations of the Greek texts. And when we talk about Rome and Greece, we're actually mostly talking Greek texts. There was a lot written in Latin, but all the philosophy and most of the culture, most of Mediterranean culture was a Hellenistic Greek culture. And so when the Eastern Rome was going for like 1,000 years past the fall of Western Rome, it kept all of that. So it had all of the books, it had the knowledge, it had the traditions. And when it fell, those people fled to Italy mostly and brought with them the books. And so there was new translations of Aristotle. Most of Plato came out at this time. All of the books that weren't lost came to us mostly at that time. Before that, there was only a couple books of Aristotle, maybe one or two of Plato. Very little that came before the fall of Constantinople. So 1420 roughly, when it was taken over by the Seljuk Turks. I can't remember exactly which group, but anyway, they came and they conquered the city. They were predestined people. They definitely saw that as predestination. But then the knowledge came to Europe, and then there was this Renaissance, and everything exploded with the idea of we could actually think our way out of some of these problems that we've been locked into for the Middle Ages. And so we could start making new things, new art. Things didn't always have to be the same. And it was looking back at the classical traditions and then saying we can go past that. We can come up with something new beyond that.
Okay, and it's it almost that makes sense. That would absolutely kick off the Renaissance. And I think
very much the history of this is that spiral I'm talking about. We're going back, but we're going forward. We're going back and forward as we sort of advance in history. What were you saying? Sorry.
Well, no, I just think, especially in America, it's easy for us, because we are physically separated from it. It's easy for us to forget just how geographically close
Pangea, it's a thing.
That whole area is. Well, not just Pangea, but I mean, when you're talking about the Mediterranean, that whole area, how close Greece is, how close southern Italy is to like Turkey, to
it was all one
Eastern
big Hellenistic world under the Romans.
Right there, exactly. You could take a ferry, you guys.
Exactly.
I mean, it's very, very close. Yeah.
So anyway, that's sort of how these ideas started to change again, and then it went through a lot of the alchemy stuff I talked about and trying to figure out. Create new stuff. That was the alchemy, little magic. And then it started to get sort of rigorous again with the German philosophers. And so then things got really, I know, things got really hard to read.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You get things like Hegel. Hegel would talk about the freely determined will, or that the free will is a circle.
Okay.
The freely determined
will. But that's the same as the freely determined will, so it's free will that was already predetermined.
Exactly.
So you just feel like it's free, like you're making the choice.
Like that. But you get the idea of your past actions determine your future actions, which then determine your future actions. So that you don't really have free will, because everything from your past is deciding what you're going to decide in the future. But your future is also decided by what you're deciding now. So it's a freely determined will that you can freely choose, but everything behind you is determining what's happening. And you come back again. And that's why it's a circle.
Well, in a very realistic, I mean, everything that your parents did and their parents did does have an effect on you. So
Exactly.
it's that their free will is what made your destiny, kind of. So it's a way that you
if I
kind of
ate that
sort
entire
it.
box of ice cream sandwiches yesterday, and I chose to do that, and I'm going to feel crappy today, which is going to affect. That's going to automatically
affect your
mean
next
that,
audition and everything else. Yeah.
Yes, or that I'm going to make myself work out the day after that because I ate. Yeah, okay, all right. So it just sort of keeps perpetuating itself.
Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of variations on these things. So the Puritans, Plymouth and all that, very heavy into predestination. You could definitely only do what God wanted you to do, and that if it worked, it's because God wanted it to work, and if you failed, it's because God wanted you to fail. And so that combines being a loser with a sinner, and God hates you. If something goes wrong, it's because God hates you, which is a real problem. So there was a lot of problems with that, and so we sort of always in this cycle of very much American cultures emphasizing the free will, but we're coming from one that was very predetermined. So there's always these cycles.
So then that would essentially say that if you're a sinner, you can't help it.
Yep. Because God made you a sinner.
that too, and is a lot of people that are 100% predestination.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I say,
because we're talking the philosophy of it right now. Like, how do you suss this out?
Yeah. And actually, I want to go back to the Doctor Who thing now, actually, because this is kind of where this works.
We can always talk about Doctor Who.
Doctor
I'm
Who.
just gonna say that right now.
I think they might have another season. We're not sure.
We're not sure. Things are up in the air right now. Things are up in the air.
For good reasons, but we'll talk about that later.
No, but it was turning around, but we'll talk about it later.
No, but what we always go Doctor Who. Okay, so what I appreciate about what makes sense to me as far as that is more my philosophy of I believe there are things that are going to happen. They have to happen. Titanic sinking. I know they use that example. That had to happen because if that hadn't happened, there would have been several other ships that crashed because that changed the course of the world. The shootout at the OK Corral, Doc Holliday shot somebody to save Wyatt Earp when he didn't know him.
Yeah, that's the fixed points in time.
Created that, which actually changed history. Everything else revolves around that. I believe there's those points, but up to that point,
you can't kill Hitler.
Going left or right.
You can't kill Hitler.
If you're going left or right, I don't think that makes a difference. It might make a difference to your life.
Yeah, and so
you don't know what
that gets you into the entire time travel problem. And there's different ways to solve some of these problems. One is anything you change at all. You step on a butterfly and the whole world is changed and your friends disappear and all this kind of stuff.
The butterfly effect, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Other ones, it's really hard or it's impossible to change history. Or whatever you do is the history. Yeah. And that was what was going to happen anyway. And there's a lot of problems with this. Luckily, we don't actually have to deal with it because time travel is impossible for physics reasons that are actually related, right? If I stop myself from going back in time, by going back in time to stop myself going back and you just get into paradoxes. Yeah. I always love the Penguins of Madagascar version where Skipper says, all I wanted to do was slap a hippie and now I've got multiple Kowalskis. When you end up creating more and more paradoxes as you try and fix the paradoxes, and there's been many plays on that. The multiverse is an interesting sort of solution to this, where you can actually have all of these possibilities existing simultaneously with the multiverse, and that's coming out of the physics tradition. So, in the Renaissance, where we start figuring out that we can figure stuff out on our own, you get the alchemical tradition leading to Newton, and Newton figures that everything is mechanical. Right, one thing hits another thing, and everything is caused.
I see the logic. Yeah,
caused from before, exactly. And because of this, while we might not know what the future is going to be, the future is entirely determined, and it has been determined since the very beginning of the universe.
Because
would be a very
because everything everything is aftershock.
It's a giant game of pool. Everything is just the things bouncing around, and they only happen according to fixed rules that cannot change. And so that was the world we were living in the physics world, up until say 1910s, 1930s, that sort of region, when we get quantum mechanics. And it's quantum mechanics which really gives us the multiverse. And the idea is
and scientifically gives us the multiverse. Like
scientifically gives us the multiverse, because if you have a particle, it only goes one place. If you have a wave, things are smeared out. But particles behave like waves and vice versa. So you can actually have particles that's a single particle that actually interferes with itself. So interference, like you have two waves, and where they go together, they go up higher, and where they cancel out, there's, it's gone. It's like harmonics, where they go, woo. That kind of interference pattern happens from one photon at a time. You don't need all of the photons. You can do it one particle at a time, actually causes interference.
Wow.
So you have two slits in a piece of paper.
Yes.
And the particle can go either way, but will actually cause light and dark lines on the paper on the other side, where it's been interfering with itself. And so that means it actually went through both slits. And so that's where the multiple worlds come in. The only way that particle, that single thing, can interfere with itself is if it actually went through both slits at the same time. It had a choice and chose both.
Yeah.
Isn't this where we start getting into the whole like blinking in and out of existence, like the particles are
some of this kind of stuff? Yeah. Once you get small enough, things can't really exist or not exist. They're both.
Yeah.
And it is quantum computing. All the possibilities are there at the same time. It's why quantum computing can figure out, code breaking much faster than modern normal computers, because normal computers have to do one thing at a time. Quantum computers can do everything all at once.
So that's just because I'm going to try to keep this in pop culture a little bit.
Sorry.
No. It's very much the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I love this.
Yeah. It's the improbability drive. It takes you to every fixed point before it gets you to the right point.
Something like that, exactly. All the possibilities are possibilities. Even if they're incredibly unlikely, there's still a thing that is possible. And that's, the whole bell curve of probabilities. And so that seems to be what Marvel's kind of working off in a very loose way when they have
do it really well.
Worlds. But every time I make a choice, both choices exist. And so that would be one way to solve it, right? Both were predestined because both those choices existed. And then either one I choose, there's a whole universe related to that choice.
So are we looking at, well, I'm sorry, I have to ask this. So are we looking at more of a another dimension or another vibration where you can't see that vibration, that they're both happening at the same time?
Okay, my personal belief is that there's only one universe. And that that the universe for all of us is separated by the speed of light. So I'm in my own universe that's separated by the speed of light from you. So we seem like we're in the same universe, but we're actually a little bit off.
Okay.
You're a little bit in my past, I'm a little bit in your past. And that these variations happen because of this difference in time. But that's, again, getting pretty physics philosophy.
But how does that happen if how do you have kids? And then create their own universes, Well,
when we're really close together, we're almost exactly in the same universe, and it's tiny, parts of nanoseconds apart, but it is, we all are, even sound waves are a little bit like this. It seems like we're all in the same conversation, but what you're saying is in my past, just because sound took a while to get to me. Right. And it's easy to see when you see an explosion in the distance. You see the light first, and then you hear the sound. That kind of dissonance, isn't hard to deal with. But I think it's happening at a much wider scale with the speed of light. I think that's actually what might be happening with these particles, is that they're living in slightly different timelines, and then they're sort of unifying again.
Yeah.
And I think that actually works pretty well with the idea of these fixed points. I don't know if it's a real solution, but it's a satisfying one. That
it's comforting.
You don't have to have an infinite number of universes for every time a particle does something. It only matters if it matters. It only matters if none of them have a significant event that's really going to change everything. So if you're looking at particles hitting a detector, slowly the detector is going to read more and more energy, and then suddenly it flips a switch. Once that switch is flipped, that's a fixed point. That's something that actually happened. Up until that point, you don't know if Schrodinger's cat is dead or alive. It's both.
So the guy's thinking about robbing the bank, but until he does it, it never happened.
It never happened. Exactly. Yeah. And that one seems to be pretty satisfying, that you can live in a single world with an infinite number of possibilities, but only one set of things happens in your single world. That one for me works pretty well. And the way Marvel tries to deal with it is they sort of try and have their cake and eat it too, but that's fine. But they have these multiple timelines splitting where whatever is happening in that timeline is what's happening in this one. Whatever is happening in this one is happening in this one. And sometimes you can cross between them, but mostly not. Mostly there's just two separate timelines.
Yeah.
Doctor Who tried to have the same idea, that you have these separate worlds with some sort of void in between them.
But Doctor Who could not go between those two.
Right. Yeah. And if you do, you crack the void, and then bad things happen.
Right. They also, I mean, with the predestination thing, what keeps coming to mind is there's this wonderful episode that's the Waters of Mars, and there's a character in it. I mean, they're who is supposed to be dead, and the Doctor cannot resist and ends up saving them, and the character realizes what's happened, and then they choose to take their own life in order to make sure that they are not interfering with everything that's supposed to happen in the future. So it's that it kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier with you may have a fixed point in time, but maybe the details of it,
you can change the details. Yeah, Doctor Who's great that way.
Nudged.
Yeah, like the one with Volcano Time, where where they're trying to save Pompeii. You can't save Pompeii. It happened, right? We all know what happens. You can't stop it. But you could save one family. You could take one family who happens to be a later doctor.
Weird writing. Weird writing.
No, it was great. It was great. Who frowned me this face? It would had to remind him. But sorry, didn't mean to make this into a Doctor Who episode, but
Well, it's good because time travel, it involves all the same questions. Yeah,
true.
I think Doctor Who's like pretty much the most out there, is where they're out in the multiverse. These are throwing these concepts out.
Yeah.
Well,
they've had the time to dabble. Yeah.
And it solves a lot of the problems. I don't think it actually answers the philosophy, but it's sort of like the original Greek answer, that there's a lot of choices you can make, but you're going to one place. Your fate is fixed. It's been written. Okay, I'll slightly switch cultures. When Monkey had to be dealt with by the entire Chinese pantheon, he was immortal, but they killed him. And so he's like, you can't kill me. He went down to heaven and erased his name from the Book of the Dead where it said he died. He also erased most of the other monkeys' names he could find, so that all of his monkey friends all became immortal, because now their fate didn't exist anymore. And so, I think this is a little bit of the idea in Yom Kippur, where you have your fate has been written, and you have this sort of week long during Rosh. No, I'm not Jewish. I'm terrible at this stuff. But you have this week where your fate has been written, but it hasn't been fixed, and you have this period where you can atone. And so it's called the Day of Atonement, and you can change things. You've sort of set yourself up for what you're about to do during the year, because all your choices behind you have led you to this point, but you still have a choice. And moving forward, you have this time when you can atone for those things in the past, and now you can go on to a new path. And I like these ideas of kind of having a fixed path, but having the ability to change it or choose a way within it.
So this brings another theme that you see in a lot of pop culture. I mean, just culture, storytelling in general is is redemption, the redemption story. So what doesn't that if everything is predestined, doesn't that cheapen the redemption?
Good question. Very good question. This is why people will talk about Jesus as being the answer to original sin, that
Mhm.
you've now broken this very fixed cycle where you've been separated, and that this is something to bring us back. Other people believe it differently. I don't want to get into that stuff, but the idea of redemption, I think, is certainly built into Christian thought. It seems to be built into other
A lot of other philosophies. Yeah.
philosophies.
Mhm.
So, what does that mean if we were going to do that bad thing anyway? Is redemption just feeling sorry about it? It doesn't feel like that's redemption to me. It
No.
feels like you have to do something more where you actually change your path.
Mhm.
But that's that again, my personal opinion
Yeah.
on things. I don't feel you can just feel bad about something. That doesn't feel like redemption
Well,
to me.
there's a difference between feeling bad about something and doing something about
Doing
it.
something, yeah, I think that's a
But-
different. Yeah.
And what we're really hitting on, I think, is every society that's kind of changed predestiny versus free will. You've named a million of them as we've went, and we've even said it. It's like, oh, well, that's where they're comfortable at. And I think wherever makes society work, like what we're saying is this is the most comforting. This works for our society, that you can be redeemed, you have free choice, but you're going to get where you're supposed to get in the end. So I think it really is more just a psychological. So, and we're never going to answer the question.
Now we're talking psychology. I would like to change the conversation ever so slightly. So we've been talking physics and religion and sort of predestination and those concepts. But what's happening in your brain? We have a whole collection of hormones and neurotransmitters deciding what we do for us that is outside of what our conscious mind is. Like, our conscious mind is like this thin layer on all these other motivations that are telling us what to do. And again, it's one of these things where there's no really great answer. It's sort of what I was talking about, the freely determined will, where you have these motivations. I haven't eaten today, so now I'm hangry. It's making me lash out. I can decide not to, but that's sort of my default if I happen to have that collection of hormones and neurotransmitters in my brain at that moment. And so I have only a small amount of wiggle room I can do inside that. Now I can decide I should eat something, and have, my self-reflection and realizing what I'm doing to myself. But it's not at all easy to understand your own set of motivations. This is the kind of stuff that Freud was trying to deal with. It's not your personal choice. It's how your mother treated you. And this is everything back behind you. This
Victimhood mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is not something that the Renaissance people would have acknowledged at all. And certainly,
really?
the whole age of reason, they would have disagreed with the idea that your past had anything to do with how you were going to make decisions. A great artist was a great artist because of them, not because of their mother. And so, Freud was writing about Leonardo and Leonardo's mother and why his art came out the way it did. I disagree with Freud strongly on many different topics, but it's interesting to think about. And it's something we've left behind again. Like, we so hate Freud now that we don't think our mothers did anything.
But we've seen all the bad things, all the other stuff. It gets all, again, this is kind of a problem with, let's say it is the multiverse. All the bad stuff that we know now about him, that he was doing some evil stuff, it negates all the good stuff. So, I mean, wish you could separate.
It's not easy, but we don't know.
But that's a psychological, I think, versus anything else.
Yeah, but the whole discipline of psychology doesn't even think about that stuff anymore. Now it's all just, behavioral psychology. Put a marble in a jar, and that'll encourage you to do something which is related to the dopamine stuff. So, I get a dopamine reward because someone dropped a marble in a jar because I did something good. Now I'm going to want to do something good again, and so it gets you back to that sort of Brave New World kind of. Where we're going to be programmed to do certain things, but we're not going to think about our sort of whole psychological being that led up to that. We're just going to try and reprogram ourselves and put the marble in the jar, hear that plink, and say, "I did a good job. I'm a good boy." And it's a practical way to deal with it. And it's, as you were saying, our society right now really needs that practical stuff, right? We need to understand how our motivations work in a practical sense. We're not 19th century Vienna where we had to figure out why 20-year-old young ladies were acting so strangely, and Freud was like, well, because you're super repressed,
because you need cocaine.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And so we've kind of ignored all that. We've said, okay, yeah, that probably some things happen because we're super repressed. Now let's ignore that and move on and pretend we're totally free will again. And yes, we're always in these cycles of we're going back to, yes, we actually have agency in our lives. And then as soon as we do that, we start finding out, oh, actually, maybe
I don't like all the responsibility.
I don't like the responsibility.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
consciousness is an illusion. Maybe, it's my neurons are in a certain configuration, sending messages to each other. And so, there are definitely people in the sort of neuropsychology world where everything is about neurotransmitters who think our consciousness is not about making decisions, but justifying the decisions we've already made.
Oh, interesting.
So that what Freud would call the unconscious or subconscious, we're now sort of thinking of as our limbic system, where the emotions come from. This sort of people call it the reptile brain. It's your basal ganglion. It's what my crayfish have. They don't really have a brain. They just have a basal ganglion, tells them where food is. They go hunting the food. And then we put our neocortex, the mammal brain, on top of that basal ganglia, and it makes decisions, but a lot of things seem to be sort of retro explaining why we felt that way in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We don't fall in love with someone as a conscious choice, but then once we feel that way, we make choices. Yeah. We start having things we'd like to do.
Yeah.
And is that a good idea? Maybe I shouldn't feel that way about that person. I'll just try and avoid them. Those are conscious choices.
Well, see, now that's where, again, in pop culture, but I think love is you fall in love with someone because it's not a conscious activity. It happens.
It happens. It seems that way.
And some people choose to be with that person for the rest of their life, and because that's what it's supposed. I think that's really the fixed point in our life, is because we don't have a choice. It's going to happen. I mean, when I met my wife, it was very in an inopportune time. I'm like, I wasn't looking, blah, blah, bam. And then next thing you know, we're married. But I think that is those fixed points. And I think that's the one thing I think that really matters through all this conversation. We can say why, but I think that you get that's the point where I'll look for him, which is, the whole world is built on love. I know I sound like a stupid hippie right now, but
so, what about people who have fallen in love with different people over time and who don't have that
okay. I'm not going to say every love is the real love, because I mean I think there is a difference. I think people do fall in love with more than one person in their life, but it's that person, when you hit that person. And I say, I could be talking about my butt right now.
I have different philosophies about that myself.
And I know I'm talking my butt a little bit right now, but yeah.
Well, think about the biology of that. So you can have like a duckling can imprint on you, like opens its eyes, sees you, it falls in love.
Yeah,
that's like love at first sight. It's fixed. It's not going to change. Now, later in life, it might find another mate, or it might think that only humans are its mate. It can get confused that way. But it is sort of this fixed moment. But there's many things we say arranged marriage. People are living together, and then they fall in love. That can happen in animals world too, right? You have courtship. You decide who you want. You spend more time with them. The stag tends to start guarding that doe. The doe might actually be annoyed by the stag and wander off, and the stag sort of keeps following the doe. But eventually, if that stag is successful long enough, the doe will say, "Sure, you're my mate now." And that, and so it can go both ways. Biologically, there does seem to be something like love at first sight.
Or the doe can say, "Go screw yourself," and
all of these things.
I'm going to go hang out with another.
The doe has agency. The buck also has agency. Both of those have certain amount of free will, but their hormones are driving them. They're not trying to mate with some other kind of animal. They're very fixed. There is an image of what they want in their brain that they can't.
There is something chemical. There's something
absolutely chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's not just the chemicals, it's the configuration of the neurons. You have in your brain specific regions that correspond to a human face. And your brain in general is very good at analyzing data and recognizing things. But humans have a specific region in their brain that corresponds to recognizing people's faces, because, penguins can tell each other apart. We can't tell penguins apart. We can tell each other humans apart because we don't look the same. I think we would to a penguin,
Yeah.
and that's something where we do have this architecture that's built deeply into us, and it's going to tell us what our preferences are. I do agree with people who say like gender is something that is a bit of a mixture, but it's also something that's fixed. And that the people who you are attracted to, if you're heterosexual versus homosexual, that's something that you can be born with, and that it's something that happens because of the way your brain architecture is. I think it's not true for necessarily everyone. I would be very careful about how I would say these things, but I think some people are more flexible that way. But many of us have a very fixed architecture. Others, that architecture can be decided by society. And it's very difficult to know which one's happening. Is it society that made me act the way I am, or is it just a brain architecture?
Which is the conversation nobody wants to have.
Yeah, no, exactly. But this is free will stuff. This is free.
It is.
Is it my society that's deciding everything, or is it just a matter of hormones and brain structure? How do these things interact? Our brains are plastic. Our brains are physically shaped by our societies. What do all of those ads with scantily clad women do to our brains? Right. Are we reacting to it? What if our mom yelled at us while we're watching one of those ads? Now, do I not like that?
Or do I like it even more?
Or do I like it even more? Exactly. These all are real things that
how it has literally affected, it's affected the way that we look. It's literally affected the way that we look, because what is presented as attractive to us over and over again tends to be who people go for, the physical traits that people go for during that generation. And you see it, you can see it as tastes have changed.
Yeah, you can see how fast
over the decades.
Selfie pretty now. And it's selfie pretty is not necessarily attractive at all, but that is what is considered attractive now.
Yeah. And once upon a time it was Twiggy, and then once upon the time it was voluptuous, and and that goes back way before we had television.
I love the description of the selfie pretty as the baby tigers. Someone looks like a little baby tiger with big eyes, but sort of fierce. And it was just a good description I happened to read that seemed to make sense. And I looked at a bunch of examples. I'm like, oh yeah, baby tigers. Yeah. I get it.
So essentially, Axe body spray will only work on somebody who's actually already kind of attracted
pheromone
to you.
going.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, a lot of these things are much more ancient. Like perfumes. The reason we wear perfumes is because flowers needed to attract insects. And so they made a scent that insects use to attract the other sex. So an insect wants another insect to come to it, a moth or a butterfly. It puts out a pheromone. Now the flower has done a modification of that. It's not putting out exactly the same one. It doesn't want that insect to just come and mate with it, or at least most of the time. But it does happen. But it mostly is saying, here's a thing your brain responds to. And we're going to attract that insect to it. So it's something that has been designed by the plants to attract animals. Then we put it on ourselves to attract someone of the opposite sex. Yeah. And so we're using that same kind of spoofing to spoof each other. And this is happening on colors as well. So a fruit tells us it's ripe by turning red. We put red on ourselves to say, yeah, I'm attractive. And come to me.
Oh, see, and I always thought that was like I always thought that was, more like that flush of health was to advertise.
That's probably part of it as well, though.
Health.
Absolutely, yeah. No, they did some really interesting experiments with these prairie hens. They do this thing where they puff out their neck to attract the mate. And if you put little red dots all over that, they won't attract a mate. If it looks like acne, they're like, oh, you're parasites. I don't like
Amazing. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, we went from predestination to dating.
Wow.
Yeah, well, they're all related.
They
You know,
are all related
What
because people always
causes us
talk
to do
about
the
the
things
one.
we do? Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're back to the one, which we need to talk about the
Later.
next time
Next
that we have
time.
an episode.
Yeah.
Great episode. Thank you so much, Josh. I love talking to you because we don't know where we're going to go.
I don't know where I'm going to go.
I enjoy
We're
the
just
heck out of
something to
these
write.
episodes. This is fun. We hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Check out the website, www.iheartgeekshow.com. Use the com. We paid extra for it. Josh, do you have someplace that people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, please go to mindbodyevolution.info. That's my website. I have a bunch of my podcasts up there and a little bit of some pictures of my art and stuff like that. So
Oh
it'd
yeah,
be great.
his art's really cool. Check out his art. It's really cool.
Mindbodyevolution.info.
Nice. And Satomii, you got like 7 things going. Do you want to plug any of it?
Oh yeah, I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. If you are listening to this before September 8th, 2024, I am doing my cabaret sushi schnitzel, a Japanese German life served in an Irish American pub. Doing that over at Green Room 42 in New York City. We are also doing a live stream. So if you check out any of my socials, you can find the link to that. Satomii Hoffman, 1F, 2 N's. And then I've got some other stuff going on. I'm actually going on tour later this year. We'll be heading through the Midwest if you want to come out and say hi. And then I'm also, popping out to some of the film festivals with the Fast Track program, which is our short film that's been making the rounds. So I'm all over the place actually right now. So follow me on my socials at Satomii Hoffman everywhere, and you'll find out where I'm at. Thanks for letting me plug, man. That's awesome.
You're here all the time. Why can't we? My only thing to plug is we got something coming up. It's a year now until the actual recording date. I am bringing together some of the best musicians I've ever played with in my life, and we're going to record and see what happens with a bunch of music I wrote, and it'll be fun. And there's some people that everybody on this show knows that's going to be popping up, and some semi-famous people up there. So yay. Until next time, guys, keep on geeking on, guys.
You have been listening to the latest episode of the iHeart Geek Show. Make sure you visit our website at www.iheartgeekshow.com. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you check us out on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And keep on geeking on to all of you geek rock stars.